So I first played the Coming Out Simulator. Visually, the game is similar to Choice Texas in that in most of it, it's text based. However, there are little animations like the father moving or punching you in the face or the character being upset that add to the game. Furthermore, the background is used to show the setting of where the dialogue and conversation is currently taking place. And there were three settings. There was the bed, the dining room, and then the coffee shop at the end, which is sort of like outside the main quote unquote scope of the game. There's really two parts. There's like the playing the character coming out, and then there's the person at the coffee shop telling you about their experience. The text itself is presented like a text message on a mobile phone, and this was very interesting because it felt almost like quote unquote realer in a sense. Because in real life, like when you text someone, that's what it looks like, or when you talk to someone, it's one person and the other, one person and the other. And in Choice Texas, there was like a very like there was like sections of information between dialogue, whereas this is just conversations between people and persons. There is audio to the game. Every time a new message appears on the screen, there's like an audio bleep, and also there's like the meowing of the cat in the dining room, and there's also some sounds at the coffee shop. But I think the audio is just there to add like flavor to the game. Um, doesn't really add that much context, but it is useful when like texts come up because you're alerted that a new one has appeared. How you interact with the game is picking options. Usually three. You have three choices to choose from, and these choices have a direct impact on how the rest of the game plays out. There was one moment in the game that really stood out to me. At the end, the character at the coffee shop, Nikki, says that this game is not the end, but rather like just a part of his life. And I think it's very important to think of this game in terms of how Nikki sees it and how Nikki made it. Right? These are memories of Nikki, or could be memories of his, if he had told his parents, if he had come out differently to his parents. Right? So for the player, we simply choose the options and we read out the effects of those choices. However, Nikki had to live through this, and he had direct experience with this. And considering the way, considering the context of the game, I think the coming out simulator is just as much as a glance into Nikki's life as it is a game. The narrative of the story is the coming out story of Nikki Case. There are multiple pathways that the player can go through, and one of them is presumably the experience Nikki had, and the others are the ways that Nikki believed could have happened had he interacted with his parents in a different fashion. This game was slash is hard to relate to for me, and I feel that a lot of people probably feel the same way. I will never have this experience of coming out because I'm a straight man and Nikki's not, obviously, by playing the game. Ultimately, I do not know what I'm supposed to get out of this. I feel like directly I'm supposed to have a brief introduction of what it feels like to be a homosexual in modern society. And I think it's also important to point out that this game, the Coming Out Simulator, was made in 2010, which was, I believe, before uh, the law that made homosexual marriage legal. So I also think it's important to say that legalization doesn't necessarily mean the elimination of discrimination, and I think the experience of playing the game will be different for everyone, and what people get out of it will be different based on the current situations. However, for a straight man, I felt confused at some points in the game. There's a large range of cultures and ethnicities in the United States, and um, and Canada. The game, I believe they said they were in Canada in the game. So um, I think that when people try to put their shoes in Nikki's shoes, it could be hard for them. And even in the game itself, we see this. Nikki apparently comes from a traditional conservative Asian background, and Jack's parents seem to be very liberal and open minded. And it is even mentioned that they smoke weed with Jack's parents smoke weed with Jack. And I think that the coming out simulator is very interesting because you guess the meaning of the game through the title. However, the experiences of playing it can differ for everyone. Um, Also, there's like different paths in the game, right? So at the beginning, you are warned or you're informed that the choices that you make in the game are gonna have an impact later. It says like, oh, they don't forget what you said. So when I played through it, I made sure the first time to really remember how like what decisions I made, and then when I replayed it, I made sure to choose something different than that so that I could experience it multiple times. Were some rather like strange options. I felt like oh, this is game's gonna end in rainbows and gay unicorns, or there's like an option that you just randomly shout out like I had sex with Jack or something. So I think the game like it's kind of confusing though. Um, but yeah, the second game I played was um, Mainichi. I think that's how it's pronounced. The game dealt with the struggles of being a transgender woman in modern society, and visually, the game is a 2D scroller slash platformer. And there are really three settings that the game takes place in, each with a unique aspect that adds a lot to the experience. There's the house that the player is initially in, the street that comes after the house, and then there's the coffee shop at the end. And then once you quote unquote beat the game or the coffee shop scene is ended, you return to the house. The player is guided through a series of text messages that appear on screen that give both context of the situation, dialogue, and guidance on what to do with the character. Furthermore, there are a number of alerts that happen above characters' heads, like there's an exclamation mark, there's a heart, there's a dusty cloud thing that presumably represents anger, and these all represent emotions slash reactions to what is being said or what the current situation that the player is in. The player interacts with things through the game through choices. There are two choices usually given in a situation, such as to put on makeup or not, to play video games or not, um, to talk to the barista or just like run away, etc. And most of these choices seem to have a direct impact on what happens later in the game to some extent. For instance, when the player decides to put makeup on, they are then catcalled in the next scene in the street by multiple people. However, if the player opts not to put makeup on, they are then harassed for being transgender. Furthermore, the barista interacts with you differently depending on the choices made in the house. So if you don't dress up and you don't put makeup on, the barista will treat the character as a man, and if the barista if you put makeup on and you dress up, the barista will treat you like as a woman. I think that's a pretty important part of the game. The game takes the player through a very brief introduction of how it feels to live as a transgender person in today's society, and the player faces discrimination and harassment based on their status as transgender. However, the interactable characters have different feelings towards you based on your choices. When wearing makeup, like I said before, the player is catcalled and called beautiful, and they get compliments of the hair. However, they are also called a man, and vulgarities are shouted at them if they don't have makeup on. There's one character in the game that no matter what, who first approaches you as like, oh, you're so beautiful, like let me get your number or something, and then like he realizes you're transgender, and then he just like yells at you, and he like says really bad stuff to you. Um, Inside the coffee shop, the barista either asks the player to drink coffee with them because of their looks, aka like the makeup and dressing up, or they're talked to, like the player is talked to with typical like bro talk, like the barista says like "What's up?" or like "Yeah, no problem, dude." There are also times in the game when the player is dressed by Mister slash Sir or Madam slash Miss or like just Once again, I think it's hard to directly relate to the situation of the game for obvious reasons. However, I think it's important to see the struggles that the game presents. The game is based on truth or partial truths slash real experiences from the maker of the game, or they're based in reality. Therefore, even though the media through which it's presented is sort of a childish visual game, right? We're presented with a game that looks very childish. The context of the game is very serious and very prevalent uh, to society. Like I said before, when the coffee shop scene ends, you are then returned to the house, and like the same situation is played that you're gonna go meet up with a friend. So this seems to indicate that the story is like the the struggles don't end after the day, right? You get up the next day and you have to go through it all again, which then transfers to real life. This is what transgender people have to go through on a daily basis. That they're treated differently based on what they based on what they do in their house, right? So based on what they look like. Um, Obviously, both these games have to do with gender and sexuality, which usually aren't themes in video games. And I think that's one of the reasons these games are very unique, is because they deal with issues that aren't usually addressed with the media of video games. Um, so I think that it's important to point out that I think, especially with Man Mainichi, I think that's how it's pronounced, that the the situation that you're put into the house again and again after the game ends couldn't really be I think couldn't be put into a different media, but you can't do that with a movie. If you press play again, I guess, but a movie will be the same every single time, whereas in this game the game changes every single time you play it based on what you do. If you take a shower, if you put on makeup, if you eat, if you play video games, if you take another nap, right? You're if you talk to the barista, if you don't, right? So I think that's very important because I think it adds a pretty unique feel that couldn't really be addressed through another media. So I first played the Coming Out Simulator. Visually, the game is similar to Choice Texas in that